me due delight to see, to hear, to touch, to kiss, to die.
I want to begin by saying thank you to the Foundation for inviting me to come here this evening. I hesitate to say this, but it is 47 years since I was last in Madrid as a student. So it's wonderful to be back. I can't tell you whether anything has changed because I can't remember anything 47 years ago. It's perhaps a rather risky business coming to a country and its capital so closely associated with the Catholic faith to talk about the Protestant impact on British culture. And I feel obliged to say a word or two about my own position, first of all, for reasons which will become clear. I was born and bred and baptized and confirmed in the Anglican Church. That is a Protestant church, sort of Protestant church anyway. And I'm not sure when I was an adolescent whether I really believed very much of it. I don't now. I say that not because I'm proud to be an agnostic, but because you ought to know what my prejudices are. I may be unaware of these prejudices myself, but it's important that you should know that I'm coming at this from a secular position, not as a committed Protestant proselyte, or indeed the opposite. Before I get started, I'd also like to apologize for having to lecture to you in English rather than Spanish. I did teach myself to read Spanish a few years ago for a particular book I was writing, but I've forgotten most of that, and I'm certainly never able to speak it. However, I would like you to know that both my children are learning Spanish at school. And the only thing I was asked to bring back by my son, who is 11 years old, was a Real Madrid kit. Right, to work. As you can see, I've got quite a lot of illustrations. Well, you can't see yet, but you will eventually. You'll see I have a lot of illustrations and also a couple of video clips to support my argument. What you're seeing on the screen is a celebrated painting from the mid-18th century by William Hogarth called The Gate of Calais, or the Roast Beef of Old England. And I will talk about that towards the end of my talk. When we reach it again, you will know that your suffering is almost over. Just let me have a look at the time to make sure I don't go on too long. But I'm going to start by talking about some of the very negative effects that the Protestant Reformation had on English culture. And that means talking about this man, my friend and colleague Eamon Duffy, who's professor of church history at Cambridge and who has written an enormously influential book called The Stripping of the Altars. Now, I told you where I was coming from, so it wouldn't look as though I were trying to cheat by telling you where Eamon Duffy comes from. The very name gives you a clue. Eamon Duffy is an Irishman who was born and brought up in Dundalk. It's important to know that Dundalk is on the frontier, on the border, between the Republic of Ireland and Ulster. Dundalk is on one side of the border and Newry is on the other side. And Eamon describes himself as a, quote, cradle Catholic. He has been a Catholic since he was in the cradle, and he believes fervently in its truth. Now, that does not mean, of course, that what he writes is in any way mistaken. On the contrary, much of what he writes, I think, is incontrovertible. But his take, his interpretation of the impact of the Reformation on English culture is a particular one. There are really two parts to his interpretation. The first, he chronicles in some considerable detail, and this is by far and away, in my view, the most interesting and convincing part of the book. He describes how a millennium, 1,000 years of Catholic visual and musical culture was destroyed in the space of just 2 or 3 decades. The second part of the book, or the second part of his argument, is that this change was resisted. It was not wanted by a large portion of the English population. That is where it becomes much more controversial. I don't want to turn this into a historiographical dispute. That would turn you off very quickly indeed. May I just say in a sentence or two that my own rather flabby middle-of-the-road view is that he's partly right and partly wrong. That probably the overwhelming majority of people living in England during the middle decades of the 16th century had no very firm or clear theological position. They went with the flow. They went with Protestantism under Edward VI, bending back towards Catholicism during the brief reign of Mary I, and then back to Protestantism during the long reign of Elizabeth I. By the end of the 16th century, by 1600, most scholars, I think, would agree that the great majority of English people who had a view about their religious affiliation were Protestants. So much for historiography. There won't be any more, you'll be pleased to learn. But let me first of all, let me go on to say something about where Eamon is entirely convincing, and that is about the destruction, the negative impact that the Reformation had on English culture. This is a church which I could have chosen any one of hundreds probably. I've chosen this because it's in a town in Somerset where I went to school in the 1950s, St Mary's Church in Bruton. It's a most beautiful church. And as you can see, we're looking at a rood screen with the rood, the crucifixion above it. And it's the exception that proves the rule, because that was built, it was put up in the 20th century, in 1938. In the course of the middle decades of the 16th century, all the rood screens, all the roods were destroyed at the behest of the church authorities, at the behest of the royal authority. And this is an illustration now which is, of course, in the exhibition, or it's on a page which is in the exhibition, and indeed which Dick Humphreys showed to you if you were here at his opening lecture last Friday. It's from Fox's Book of Martyrs, and it shows how much iconoclasm, how much of the destruction of images took place across England. It's a very good illustration. I won't bang on about that, because Dick said quite a lot about it and gave you a good illustration of how the faces have been excised from a medieval manuscript in the possession of my college, in fact. The really major impact of the Reformation, not just in a religious sense, but in a social, economic, and indeed political sense, was the destruction of the monasteries. A huge number of monasteries were secularized in the course of the 1530s and 40s. None survived by the end of the 16th century. It's difficult to exaggerate the importance of this, because it was not just that what had previously been a center of a very rich and deep culture was destroyed almost without trace, but it also led to a huge change in land ownership. It has been estimated, although it's barely credible, it has been estimated that something like a quarter of the cultivable land of England changed hands during these decades. This was by far and away the greatest socio-economic upheaval which had taken place since at least the Norman conquest in 1066, and had very important social results, which I'll come to in just a moment. But I want to give you one or two illustrations. As those of you who've traveled across England will know that it's difficult to move very far without seeing at least some ruins of abbeys which had been destroyed during the middle decades of the 16th century. This is Glastonbury in Somerset. That is a particularly famous one. That's Fountains Abbey in Yorkshire. Also in Yorkshire are Rievaulx Abbey and Whitby. I've got many, many more parishes. They were used as quarries. The stones were taken from the secularized monasteries and used to build houses. Another way in which the Reformation and the dissolution of the monasteries destroyed a very deep culture was musical. And again, in a way, what I'm going to show you is the exception that proves the rule, because it's an abbey which was restored in the 20th century. I wonder whether there's some music. Latin plain... Oh, all right, that'll do. Thank you, monks. That's a Latin plain chant, which prior to the Reformation, prior to the dissolution of the monasteries, could have been heard all over England and came to an abrupt halt. That, incidentally, was a recording made just a couple of years ago by the monks of Prinknash Abbey. Another very serious effect on the musical life of England was the dissolution of the so-called chantries. This may be a challenge for your interpreter. She has my sympathy. A chantry was a foundation created by private individuals for the saying of masses for souls in purgatory. And a huge amount, over the centuries, over the Middle Ages, a huge amount of money had been invested in chantries for obvious reasons. They all went. And even if one doesn't believe that purgatory is a realistic or an acceptable theological proposition, we can all regret the musical disaster which that inflicted, because many of these chantries supported singing. So here are just three examples. This exquisite little chantry is in Winchester. This one is in Morbach in Wiltshire. And the third is a chantry house where three priests were lodged, their occupation being to say masses for the souls of the dead. That's a chantry house in Wiggiston in Leicestershire. So as you can see, the whole cultural fabric of England was torn apart by the Reformation in a wholly negative, or in an almost entirely negative sense. I think Eamon Duffy goes a little too far when he says that music, ecclesiastical music, church music stopped. That's not strictly speaking true, but it's a rather technical point, and I don't have time to go into it here. However, what he has shown is the extent to which, as I said, 1,000 years or more of Christian culture was torn up and destroyed by the Reformation. And it was accompanied by a process of secularization, which I'm going to illustrate by contrasting two buildings in my own home city, or what has been my home city for the last 50 years, Cambridge. This is probably a building well known to you from illustration, if not from personal experience. It is, of course, the chapel of King's College in Cambridge. It was founded by Henry VI. Building work began in 1446. It's one of the, if not the finest example of late Gothic architecture anywhere to be found in Europe. And I've deliberately left the mother and child in the foreground to give you some idea of the size of the building. It was finished, it took almost exactly a century to build. It was finished in 1546, in the same year that Henry VIII founded Trinity College in Cambridge from the proceeds of monastic sales, and endowed it with monastic land. So we can see a shift, as it were, from the glories of King's College Chapel, at least they managed to get that finished, to Trinity College, Cambridge. This is an illustration from Logan's prints of the 17th century. You can see the library built by Sir Christopher Wren at the far end. Trinity College is, for those of you who are, why should any of you be familiar with the economic arrangements of Oxford and Cambridge, but Trinity College, as you can see, is a very large and grand place. It is by far the richest and biggest of all the Oxford and Cambridge colleges. Now, the beneficiaries were not just the colleges of Oxford and Cambridge, although they certainly did benefit to a very considerable extent. My own college, Sidney Sussex College in Cambridge, was founded by a Puritan lady, Lady Frances Sidney, Countess of Sussex, in 1596. I would not be standing in front of you now if there hadn't been a Reformation, because there would have been no college for me to go to. I would have had to have gone somewhere else, probably I would have sunk without a trace. But that's another story. But there were other beneficiaries. And the great beneficiaries of the Protestant Reformation, with all kinds of cultural consequences, was the landowning class in England, who were able to pick up very quickly, at very reasonable rates, huge quantities of land which came on the market as a result of the dissolution of the monasteries. This is a new class. This is not an old class which is being expanded or deepened. It is a new class. most of the great aristocratic families of medieval England had died out in the course of the 15th century, either as a result of economic pressures or as a result of the problems they experienced during the civil wars of the middle decades, which we call the Wars of the Roses. To the top, in the course of the 16th century, a new class of landowners. Some of them become very rich indeed very quickly. I've got two examples for you. The first is this man, chosen in part because it's such a wonderful drawing by Holbein, which gives you some idea of the kind of status that John Russell, the first Earl of Bedford, had acquired by the time Holbein drew him in 1540. Russell came from nowhere. He came from Dorset, where his father was a modest landowner who also traded in wine. But through a combination, as ever, of enterprise, industry, intelligence, and good luck and good timing to be in the right place at the right time, Russell rose to become, by the standards of the day, a multimillionaire. He acquired estates, a great estate, right across England. And significantly, the core of that great landholding were abbeys, were secularized abbeys. Tavistock Abbey in Devon, Woburn Abbey in Bedfordshire, and Thorpe Abbey in Cambridgeshire. And it was at Woburn Abbey, this is a modern aerial photograph, the family still own it, the Dukes of Bedford, of course, have been since the 17th century, at Woburn Abbey, and it's still called Woburn Abbey, and that, of course, again is a clue, as if you travel across England, moving from one stately home to another, you must be impressed by the number which are called abbeys, and of course that relates back to their origin. This is Woburn Abbey, and there's a picture of the house as it was developed in the course of the 18th century. And that was a great fortune based on monastic land which had been dissolved. The other example I've got for you, architecturally, is greatly superior, and this is Longleat House in Wiltshire. It's on the border between Wiltshire and Somerset, which was built by a man called Sir John Thynne, spelt Thynne. He, like Russell, came from nowhere, and he made a huge fortune with great land holdings across central and southern England. And the family still own Longleat. They're now the Marquis of Bath. The Marquis of Bath still owns Longleat, which is turned into a kind of circus and a lion park and so on and so on. But they're still there. This is a painting, as you will see, from the late 17th century by the Dutch artist Jan Silberechts. And I was very pleased to see in the exhibition that there was another painting by Silberechts, which I retrieved from the web and have slotted into my presentation. It's out there for you to see. This is a picture of Henley from the Wargrave Road. And quite a lot can be taken from this, I think. It's a very beautiful painting, it seems to me, but it also tells us a lot about how English agriculture has developed in the course of the 16th and 17th centuries. Now, I must not be reductionist in the sense of reducing everything to a single cause. It isn't just the Reformation, the dissolution of the monasteries, the great transfer of property that is leading to these developments. There are all kinds of other things at work as well. But that the Protestant Reformation, through the dissolution of the monasteries, had a big impact on this, I think, is undeniable. And what we can see in this painting by Silberechts is that we have here a commercial agriculture. It's not a subsistence agriculture as one might have found in large parts of the continent of Europe. This is a commercial agriculture. We can see the boat laden with agricultural produce waiting to be taken down the Thames to the markets of London. We can see the huge hay wain being an indication of agricultural prosperity is that it is being pulled by two horses accompanied by a farmer on a horse next door to him. But perhaps most important of all, and of course there's a mill and one or two other things, but one thing which might well escape your attention if I didn't point it out, but as you're an intelligent audience which has come to my lecture, you probably would have guessed anyway, what we can see here is our enclosures. The open fields of the medieval period have gone. This is individualist agriculture The fields have been enclosed. They have been enclosed to allow individual initiative and enterprise and to encourage commercial farming for the market. And I hope you won't think what I have to say now over the next few minutes is trivial. I don't think that it is. If it seems to you to be trivial, I apologize. This also led to, I think the word is justified, to an explosion of hunting. It's difficult to exaggerate the importance of hunting to the rural life of the kind of people who had benefited from the dissolution of the monasteries. Not just the great magnates like the Duke of Bedford or the Marquis of Bath, but trickled down all the way down through their tenant farmers. They pretty well all hunted. I've come across, this is just an example plucked out of the air, but I think it's quite an eloquent one. This is a Devon squire, a squire in the county of Devon, claiming, this is the middle of the 18th century, that he had hunted with 72 different foxhound packs in the county of Devon. If you live, there's another example, if you lived in Newbury in Berkshire, within a radius of 10 miles, just 10 miles, you could hunt with 5 packs of foxhounds and 7 of harehounds, harriers, as we call them in English, again, in the late 17th, early 18th century. This has a major impact on English visual culture. There aren't many examples in this exhibition, but anyone who has been to the Tate Gallery in London, or indeed has travelled around the stately homes of England, will know what I'm talking about. Let me give you an example. This is Longleat. Going inside Longleat into the Great Hall, what do we find? That the hall is surrounded by paintings of hunting scenes and hunting trophies. This was at the heart of the legitimacy of the ruling class in England, in the rural world, and also in the urban world as well. It's often forgotten just how many people living in towns hunted as well. So, if I can give you one further illustration, this rather fine painting by James Seymour from 1743 shows a kill at Ashdown Park. And there's been a nice turnaround from the painting of Longleat, where you saw the huntsman in the foreground, but the house dominated. In this painting by Seymour, we have the hunt that dominates, and the house, Ashdown Park, is to be seen in the distance. And any history of English painting in the 17th or 18th centuries really must include a big and long, maybe more than one chapter on sporting art. This is a supreme example, it seems to me. This is George Stubbs' painting of the Grosvenor Hunt, owned by the Earl. He was actually, I think, just Lord Grosvenor at the time. Eventually, the Grosvenor family became Dukes of Westminster, probably the richest landowner in England today. I make the point because there's a kind of contemporary resonance hanging about what I have to say. You will have noted already that the Russells and the Thinns and the Grosvenors are still going strong. What I'm talking about is in many ways, a very conservative culture. This may be a country in which the Industrial Revolution first happened, but in many respects, it is still a very conservative culture. And that has a lot to do with the great socio-economic upheaval which occurred as a result of the Protestant Reformation. I wonder whether one can find, excuse me, I have a frog in my throat, just drown it. I wonder how many other European countries one could find someone like the Earl of Yarborough paying George Stubbs a very large sum of money to commission a portrait of his favourite foxhound. This is Ringwood, who proved to be a wonderful, wonderful painting, it seems to me. Ringwood was a great success at stud, and many were the foxhounds that his loins engendered. But along with hunting went horse racing. I don't have time to talk about that. Everyone knows about the importance of horse racing in English sporting art. But I do want to put in a word for two subsidiary forms of rural sports, which are now almost forgotten. Although in the period I'm talking about, the 16th, 17th, and 18th centuries were hugely important. Wherever one found people hunting, One also found people going to horse races, and one also found people coursing. Coursing is the pursuit of a hare by two greyhounds, they have to be greyhounds, on a competitive basis. Or indeed, and I hope I don't cause too much offence here, cockfighting. Cockfighting was widespread across the country, and it all went together. These are not separate or discrete categories. They're pursued by landowning people simultaneously. And of course, the most celebrated of all illustrations of cockfighting is Hogarth's the Royal Cockpit. And then one final example. I'm becoming a little bit self-indulgent now, so I must hurry on. This magnificent painting looks actually quite good on the big screen there by Johann Sophany of Colonel Mordaunt's cock match, painted in 1784. As you can tell, it's painted in India. Got a little pointer here. This is Colonel Mordaunt here. He was actually a sort of factotum for the Nawab of Oud, one of the great Indian princes, and the cocks are fighting in the foreground. We could spend another hour or so deconstructing this painting, but I must hurry on. These, of course, all this is now illegal. Hunting, not horse racing, but hunting, coursing, cockfighting, all illegal, although all still going strong, clandestinely. Right, you may think I've rather wandered away from the Reformation. It's time to get back. Let's go back into the early 16th century to London and to Parliament. This is a very fine illustration from my friend John Adamson's book, which shows us the complex of buildings around Westminster Abbey, Westminster Hall, the various law courts which sat in and around Westminster Hall, the House of Commons, and the House of Lords down here, and then going off the picture, the Palace of Whitehall, which grew in the course of the 16th century into, spatially at least, the biggest palace in Europe. Now, the reason why I've put this there is to make a point which is really very important, often overlooked by English students, but not those who have read the works of Sir Geoffrey Elton, and that is that it is a great mistake to think in terms of Parliament versus Crown, of a conflict between Parliament and King or Queen. We know that in 1649, Charles I had his head chopped off. So there's a natural tendency to assume that there was, as it were, a latent or indeed overt conflict ever since Parliament first developed in the early Middle Ages. That's not the case. It was exceptional for there to be conflict between Crown and Parliament. Crown and Parliament worked together. Indeed, it is important to state that the King or Queen were members of Parliament themselves. The sovereign body, as the 17th century hammered out, was the King or Queen in Parliament. And it was Parliament which cooperated gladly, willingly, enthusiastically with Henry VIII to bring about the Protestant Reformation, or at least the break with Rome. There's, of course, a distinction but to be drawn between those two things. Parliament cooperated enthusiastically with the Crown to bring about the break with Rome. This is Holbein's celebrated painting of Henry VIII. It's only a copy because, of course, the original, of which this is also a copy, it started out in life as a mural in the new Palace of Westminster, of Whitehall. It started out as a mural, but was destroyed in a great fire there in 1698, but not before copies had been made. So we know pretty well what it looks like. If I can just go back, yes, it does work wonderful. There's tremendous equipment you've got here. Just go back to the portrait of Henry VIII. This is really full on Holbein's depiction of Henry VIII. It's quite unlike, I was looking at the paintings of Spanish monarchs in the Prado yesterday, and this is distinguished by its aggressive stance. And I'm not being salacious in pointing to the fact that we have this enormous codpiece, which is quite obviously intended to look as though it is erect. The crown needed, after the break with Rome, there was obviously a very serious crisis of legitimacy. And this was one of the ways, a very important way, at a time when visual images were so much more important than they were to become later. This was a very important way of making a statement about the legitimacy of the crown. And one can see the images of the king and the queen, the two queens, of course, in the 16th century, as they developed, as they're on an upward trajectory. This may seem at odds with any kind of modernizing project, but they're on an upward trajectory. So if one follows the illustrations of Queen Elizabeth, this is the so-called Darnley portrait of 1576, followed by the famous Sieve portrait of 1583. The sieve symbolizes her virginity, of course. We can see that the images are becoming less naturalistic, so much less naturalistic than Holbein's depiction of Henry VIII. They are becoming more icon-like, almost more Byzantine. I feel almost ashamed to put this one on the screen with a Spanish audience in front of me, but this is, of course, the Armada Portrait of 1589. I think it was painted with the Spanish Armada coming to grief in the background, and Queen Elizabeth with her hand on the globe. I think we'll just hurry on from that one. I don't want to cause mass exodus. But there we are. This is the largest of all the portraits of Queen Elizabeth. This is the Ditchley portrait of 1592. And by the time we come to the coronation portrait of 1600, just 3 years before she died, any kind of feature, distinguished, personifying feature, has disappeared, and it's become like a holy icon. And the idea that Queen Elizabeth, the Virgin Queen, never married, had taken the place of the Virgin Mary as an alternative female figure to be worshipped can be seen here very clearly. That's a very interesting a proposition, it seems to me, but one I can't explore here. What I must now go on to now is to say something about one of the great changes, the great cultural changes. It's all been visual now. Now we need to go a little bit more literary to the translation of the Bible into English. This is William Tyndale, who in 1526 published a translation of the New Testament. Now, there had been translations in the past, before the Reformation, of bits and pieces of the Bible. But to say that Tyndale's translation of 1526 wrought a revolution which was not just confined to religion, but affected the whole of the English language is, I don't think, an exaggeration. And this is a comment by my late and much lamented colleague, Patrick Collinson, who died last year at the age of 82. He was Regius Professor of History in Cambridge in the late 1980s, early 1990s. I mean, he looks a rather fearsome man, but actually he was the sweetest and gentlest and kindest of men. And there, what we have him saying, Tyndale's translation of the New Testament was the most important of all milestones in England's literary linguistic history. That's quite a claim, but if Collinson makes it, then I'm going to accept it. The next slide is of the Great Bible. I should say that Tyndale was unable to complete his translation of the Bible by completing his translation of the Old Testament because he was burned as a heretic in Antwerp, in what was then the Spanish Netherlands, in 1536. However, what was the date? I thought I'd made a note of that. It's in 1538. This is the so-called Great Bible, produced by Miles Coverdale and borrowing heavily from the Tyndale translation. In 1538, the order went out that a copy of the vernacular, the English Bible, was to be placed in every parish church in England. And the connection with the elevation of Henry VIII, whom we can see here. This is a detail, as you can see from the top of the frontispiece of the Great Bible, was made quite explicit. And finally, that takes us to the King James Bible of 1511, this edition, of 1611. This is the, as you can see, 1613 edition, which has just celebrated its 400th anniversary. More of that in just a moment, but before I get on, I've got a little video clip. Before I get to that, I need to put into the mix with these English Bibles, which have a simply colossal impact on the development of the English language. There is so much of the English language which emerges as a result of the Protestant Reformation. If I don't simply stood up and said that and then walked away, I would have delivered a most important truth. The other thing that needs to be put in the mix is the Book of Common Prayer, which was produced under the supervision of Archbishop Cranmer, the Archbishop of Canterbury, in 1549. Also has had a huge impact on the development of the English language. Now, what I've got now for you, I hope it works, it's a little video clip. I had to download it from YouTube, in which Melvyn Bragg, probably not a household name in Spain, why should he be, but he certainly is in England. He's one of the most prominent and most respected of broadcasters in both radio and television. A great and good man, it seems to me, for all kinds of reasons. He wrote a book. Sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself now. In 2011, he published a book called Book of Books, which was about the King James Bible to mark the 400th anniversary, and went around the country giving lectures and so on. And among other things, appeared on a television program to promote his book. I hope this will come up. It may be a bit bleary. Let's give it a try.
Well, because people are indifferent to religion, a lot of them in this country, and secularism holds the microphone and atheism holds the megaphone, people discount not only the King James Bible, what's in it mostly, but the influence it had. I argue that we've lost it out of our history. We've airbrushed one of the greatest factors in the history of this country and in America. We've airbrushed it out because of this tide for pure reason and atheism, which is something, but it's not everything. And what we've lost is the notion that central to the way we speak, the language we speak, central to the way our philanthropy is developed, our education is developed, our democracy is developed, the idea of how women can enter society, central of that has come from the Bible. The Bible was the biggest instrument in abolishing slavery in America, and so on and so forth. We've lost all that, and so I'm trying to restore it. I'm trying to say this is the Book of Books, partly because it's 66 books and it was built on other books, but partly to say, look at the influence this had. Stop throwing away the baby with the bathwater, if you like. Stop throwing out most of what we have been made of in the last 400 years. So it's a fairly, it's an attempt to say to everybody, look what we've got. Let's not just forget it. It's so important, and I'm trying to bring it back into currency.
Thank you, Melvyn, and you're so right. Now, that's all been, as it were, what I've been saying recently, and I must start to speed up, otherwise I'm going to run out of time. It has been positive, but there's a negative side too. And however painful this may be, it has to be recognised that the Reformation introduced into English culture a most virulent strain of anti-Catholicism. And here's another distinguished scholar, Sir Diarmaid MacCulloch, to tell us that if anything characterised the majority English approach to religion over 3 centuries, it was hatred of Roman Catholicism. It was the most consistent English political stance of the period. That has to be recognised. And I have some examples which I will try to move through quite quickly. This is a painting. No one knows who painted it. It was probably painted in about 1570. It shows Henry VIII, clearly on his deathbed, pointing to his son and successor Edward VI in a commendation. And you might think it had been painted in the year that, or round about Henry VIII's death in 1547. But in a very remarkable book by Margaret Aston, she's been able to prove, and she does it by iconographical discussion of this bedpost. I mean, it's quite a big book. She's able to show that, in fact, it was painted in 1570. And as you can see, top right, Iconoclasm is underway. Of course, they didn't regard it as iconoclasm. They regarded it as something that was wholly admirable. It was cleansing the temple of the idols. They were doing God's work. And in the bottom, we can see here the Pope being kicked out as his two monks threaten the stability of the throne. There's a huge number of this kind of anti-papal, anti-Catholic, visual image, all kinds of literary effusions of the same kind can be found from throughout the period. Perhaps the most influential single work of the 16th century, apart from the Bible, the biggest seller, of course, of all time, was Fox's Book of Martyrs of 1563. This went through dozens of editions and was still being printed in both full form, it ran to over 1 million words eventually, and in abbreviated form deep into the 18th, into the 19th century indeed. And I just want to give you one or two illustrations from this. Fox contrasts here. This is the German Emperor Henry IV, who's gone to Canossa to grovel at the feet of the Pope, and he contrasts that with Henry VIII sitting on his throne and stamping on the Pope. This is quite crude stuff, but there's a lot of it. And throughout Fox's, he liked to make his readers' flesh creep with stories of persecution, of torture, of burnings, and so it went on. This is Cranmer being burnt outside Balliol College in Oxford, where there's still a memorial. Now, I don't want to dwell on this. It's a painful subject. It just goes on and on and on, but it's absolutely central, as McCulloch said, to English perceptions of religion, and indeed it affects the whole culture. I've got one example, I think, from the... Hello? There we go. This is from the late 18th century of Irish massacres in 1641. And of course, this anti-Catholicism always had an ethnic, political edge. It was used as a stick to beat the enemy within, the Irish and the Highland Scots, who had remained loyal to the old faith. And I'll finish this sequence with the Gordon Riots of 1780 in London, when the rioters were rioting against a proposal to give Catholics a measure of relief. They took over the whole of London, despite the fact that it was a city of some 700,000 or 800,000 people for the best part of a week. There was more damage done to property during the Gordon Riots in 1780 than in the whole of the French Revolution from 1789 to 1799. That gives you some idea of the explosive force at a popular level of anti-Catholicism. Let's move on to something a little more appetizing, and that is, of course, London and the public sphere. The Reformation led to a transformation in the way in which London was organized. It eliminated at a stroke, if not all clerical influence, then it led to a great diminution of it. And I have one or two images of London to show how quickly it expanded. Now, again, let's not be reductionist about this. London would have grown for other reasons, but the Reformation certainly had a big impact. London was about, in 1500, about 60,000. By the middle of the century, it's up to 120,000. By 1600, it's 200,000. By 1650, it's 375,000. By 1700, it's 500,000. And by end of our period, 1800, it's over 1 million. It's by far and away the biggest city in Europe. There's a picture of it from the middle of the 17th century. This is from the 18th century, a German map. All the best maps are German. And as you can see, by this time, London, of course, is in essence two cities. It's the city of London in the east and the city of Westminster in the west. By the middle of the 18th century, the two have joined. And out of this very large, relatively lightly policed city, relative to continental Europe at least, comes a special kind of culture and a special kind of public sphere. A much, much larger public sphere than anywhere else in Europe, and a very different kind of culture. I've only got time to give you one particular example, but it's a good one. It is out of this that comes the great explosion of drama. in Elizabethan and Jacobean England. This is a print of London in the late 16th century, which shows you on the South Bank the 4 theatres which had developed. They certainly wouldn't have developed if there hadn't been a Protestant Reformation, and including Shakespeare's Globe, which is there. And I want to use this as a bridge into the next point I want to make by playing to you a clip of what is one of the most famous speeches in all of Shakespeare. It's John of Gaunt in Richard II, Act 2, Scene 1, and here we see Sir John Gielgud delivering the speech. I put subtitles up to help you grasp what he's getting at.
This royal throne of kings, this sceptred isle, this earth of majesty, this seat of Mars, this other Eden, demi-paradise, this fortress built by nature for herself against infection on the hand of war, this happy breed of men, this little world, this precious stone set in the silver sea, which serves it in the office of a wall or as a moat defensive to one house against the envy of less happier lands. This blessed plot, this earth, this realm, this England, this nurse, this teeming womb of royal kings, feared by their breed and famous by their birth, renowned for their deeds as far from home, for Christian service and true chivalry, as is the sepulchre in stubborn jury of the world's ransom, Blessed Mary's Son, this land of such dear souls, this dear, dear land, dear for her reputation through the world, is now leased out. I die pronouncing it, to a tenement or pelting farm, England bound in with a triumphant sea, whose rocky shore beats back the envious siege of watery Neptune, is now bound in with shame, with inky blots and rotten parchment bonds. That England that was wont to conquer others hath made a shameful conquest of itself. Ah, would the scandal vanish with my life? How happy then were my ensuing death.
I have to say that is a rather Eurosceptic speech. Thank you. Right, well, the bridge, of course, takes us to the development of English nationalism, which was not the invention of the Protestant Reformation, but is enormously strengthened by it and is given a special kind of flavour, a special xenophobe flavour, which persists until the present day. In its early stages, it was deeply, intensely anti-Spanish as a result of the Armada, because Spain was the leading Catholic power. In the course of the 17th century, more especially during the reign of Louis XIV, that antipathy is transferred to France. I want 2 examples for you. This is from 1621. We haven't got time to go through all this, but as you can see, 2 crucial dates are identified at the top. 1588, the defeat of the Armada. 1605, the Gunpowder Plot, when Guy Fawkes tried and failed to blow up the Houses of Parliament. The next is from 1739, when, as you may recall, England went to war with Spain, the so-called War of Jenkins' Ear, and there we see the unfortunate Captain Jenkins having his ear cut off by a Spanish official. Completely untrue, incidentally, but never mind. And you will notice, again, I must hurry on, I'm getting very short of time now, but what we've got underneath is that speech we've just heard from Richard II in its entirety. 1 or 2 spelling mistakes, but it's there. So this becomes a persistent feature of English culture, and it derives from the Reformation. I've got 2 more examples to give, but they're quite helpful ones. I think I'm trying to bring this in under an hour, but I may be a little bit pressed. Let's go back to Hogarth's The Gate of Calais, or the Roast Beef of Old England. This may well be known to you. It's one of the most famous, if not the most famous. Of course, Hogarth was a man of business. He was in it to make money. And this painting, which is now in the Tate, of course, is transformed at once. He has it engraved and then sold in a very large number of prints. And what we're seeing is a great sirloin of beef, the roast beef of Old England, there it is, coming ashore at Calais, that's the gate of Calais, to be delivered to an English eating house in Calais called Madame Grandsire's, where English tourists could have their last square meal before having to put up with filthy foreign muck. This is quite a complicated picture, and I've got time just to identify one or two cardinal characteristics. Well, the one most obvious is the sirloin of beef. This may seem trivial, but it's been absolutely central to English nationalism, what might call dietary nationalism, the belief that only the English eat well. Only the English eat beef and drink beer, whereas on the continent they have to make do with salads and hot water with a little bit of grease in it, so-called soup maigre, and stuff like wine or whatever. The examples could be replicated again and again. This is, I won't read it out, you've done it for yourself already. This is a song from Henry Fielding's, I've not got the tune, perhaps you'd like to sing along. I don't think so. I've got a better song in a moment. We can all join in. But I know this sounds a bit quaint, but it's there. And you will have noticed there is the sirloin of beef, and as you can see, it's for Madame Grandsire's at Calais. And as you will have also noticed, that the only fat French person in this drawing is, of course, a monk. So we've got anti-clericalism, anti-Catholicism as well, whereas the French soldiers, are simply absolutely boggled, their mind, but they've never seen such a colossal piece of meat before. And this is a cartoon by Gilray from 1792, which contrasts the French revolutionaries on the left eating their grass, eating their salads with a few snails to give it a bit of spice in the up top left. And there's a clinically, morbidly obese John Bull getting stuck into his great. So there's a continuity. There's a continuity here. Now this is a less pleasing aspect. This is the anti-Catholic aspect. If you look through the gate into Calais. What you're seeing, I'm sorry, I couldn't get a better resolution. This has been blown up many, many times, of course. What we're seeing is a priest carrying the host through the streets of Calais, as Hogarth saw it. The idolatrous inhabitants of Calais slumped to their knees before what they thought was what they believed to be their god passing by in front of them in corporeal form. My slides have got slightly out of order here, I'm afraid. This is making a point about the enemy within. You can tell who this is from his tartan trews. This is a Scottish Jacobite who'd risen in revolt in 1745 against the Protestant King of England, George II. And this is a really quite seriously offensive caricature by Hogarth called Transubstantiation Satirized. As you can see, the Virgin putting the infant child into the mincer with the wafers coming out at the bottom to be distributed to the faithful. I did warn you. Let's move on. There are some French women who believe they've seen an image of Christ in the fish they're examining. It's pretty crude stuff, it has to be said, but with the hand of Hogarth, it has a kind of quality about it. And finally, this is Hogarth himself. The date is 1749. The War of the Austrian Succession has just ended. Hogarth goes on a day trip to Calais to stock up on fags and booze, no doubt, and there he was arrested. I mean, being an artist, he got a sketchbook out and started sketching the fortifications. He was at once arrested as a spy, and it was some time before he could get himself out of the hands of the French authorities. So we roll into the mix goes French despotism. It all goes together. That Catholicism means poverty, wooden shoes, soup maigre. It also means tyranny and despotism. That's how Hogarth wanted you to see it. Right, now, just one final, I'm almost going to make it on time, one final aspect. This is history. The Protestant Reformation in England created a new sense of history. It's closely related to Protestantism. It's closely related to nationalism. It could be illustrated in all kinds of ways. I've decided to do it in just one way, and that is to draw your attention to the cult of King Alfred. Now, King Alfred was an English warlord, believed by some to have been the first English king, lived in the late 9th century. This is the Temple of British Worthies, which you will find at Stowe House, just outside Buckingham in England, where in 1733 Lord Cobham created a gallery of English heroes. And one of them was King Alfred. That's his close-up. Why was Alfred there? Because, as the inscription says, he was the mildest, justest, most beneficent of kings, who drove out the Danes, secured the seas, supported learning, established juries, crushed corruption, guarded liberty, and was the founder of the English Constitution. There's quite a lot to be going on with. Of course, he could not be a Protestant because he died in whenever it was, 898. However, he's, according to those who worshipped Alfred in the 18th century, he's a kind of Protestant avant la lettre, one might say. And a real cult developed, including the writing of a masque, M-A-S-Q-U-E. That's something between a play and an opera. In 1740, it was commissioned by Frederick, Prince of Wales, the eldest son of George II, and it was called Alfred. It would have been forgotten, probably, although its text is a very interesting indication of contemporary British political attitudes, were it not for one particular song which brings the whole work to an end, and which I imagine is known to you. It is Rule Britannia. And it managed to, these are the words, the music was written by Thomas Arne. Incidentally, the Prime Minister, our current Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, David Cameron, when slipped this question by Letterman on the American TV show, was completely flummoxed. He was asked, who wrote Rule Britannia? Oh dear. It's one of those awful questions. I felt sorry for the man really. He said, Elgar? Oh, it makes you weep. Well, Cameron was at Oxford. That's what happens when you go there. It was, of course, Thomas Arne, and written 250 years before Elgar. But anyway, that's beside the point. What we've got here is all kinds of things. Britain at heaven's command. So Britain is the elect nation. Okay, it's the chosen race of God. There's a kind of Schadenfreude, nations not so blessed as these, ruled by tyrants. There's a strong libertarian element. The native oak comes in. There's the sort of arboreal semiotics. Tyrants again. Prosperity. It's all in there. And I'm going to end with a rousing rendition of Rule Britannia, which you can join in if you like, if you know the words. This is from the last night of the proms last year, with Susan Bullock giving it everything she's got, and that's quite a lot, and Edward Gardner, King's College, Cambridge, incidentally, conducting the orchestra.